So it's Father's Day today, and of course that means that marketers are trying to tap into our emotions about this day and try to sell their products. And I saw one commercial that I really liked. It's interesting how that commercial sets the example for how dads are supposed to be. And the tagline in this is, "The strongest men are those who care." Now, I would wager that this was not the message that was being promoted to fathers back when I was little. I don't doubt that my father cared, but strength was not seen as so relational and fun back then. Strength was kind of stoic and unflappable. The characteristics of a father were not seen as fun or sensitive. They were provider and protector. My dad spent his time at work earning money to pay the bills, clothe and house us. He was in charge of discipline when we were really bad. And the belt came out from time to time. And he never cried. But I loved him then as I do now, because I know he did these things that were expected of him as a sign of love for all of us. The changing status of women who have entered the workplace in unprecedented numbers has contributed to dads having to participate in domestic duties in order to ensure a family's success. By necessity, then, we as a culture are revising the traits we view as masculine or feminine. Gender roles are shifting. But this time of flux has been confusing for many, young men in particular, who are caught in the middle of this shift and are unsure of appropriate behavior for men. I have two young adult men in my home, and we have conversations often about how difficult it is for them to be men. What is required of them, what do women want, is always a question. They say they like sensitive men, but they really want strong, aggressive men. That is their impression. I read an academic paper this week that studied what they call precarious manhood. Their thesis is that manhood is actually a social status that's hard won and easily lost. It suggests that men must provide continual public demonstrations of their manhood, or their status as a man will be lost. And further, though the traits of manhood might differ from culture to culture, the need to prove your manhood and the ability to lose that is cross-cultural. On the other hand, womanhood is typically a status that follows naturally from the biological realities. And once it's earned, it remains. There is no need to prove again and again that you are a woman. The researchers found that the biggest threat to this manhood status cross-culturally is engaging in activities which are seen as feminine. And when men are gender threatened by engaging in feminine pursuits, many will seek to perform some act that will reassert their manhood. A great example of this was given in this study that I read. They separated men into two groups, and you must understand these are young men, undergraduates, usually in colleges, who want a few dollars to engage in a study. So that's the group they're dealing with. One of them was given a task that they called braiding of hair. And the other was given a task that they called making rope. And it was essentially the same task, but one with a feminine overtone. So after this task was done, they were asked whether they would like to do a puzzle, which is kind of gender neutral, or they would like to go to the gym and hit a punching bag. And the men who were told that they were braiding hair chose the punching bag more often than the men who were told they were making rope. Because engaging in aggressive behaviors is seen as a way to assert the status of manhood. As I was reading this paper, I suddenly realized how stressful it is to be a man in this time and place. There are so many messages about what you need to do to prove you are a man, and yet so many expectations for gender equality. We say we are free to be whatever we like, but many men believe they will be judged if they do not conform to society's standards of masculinity. What a stressful, untenable situation. And I want to be clear. It is not masculinity that is the problem. It is a culture that requires men to prove over and over that they are men that is really the issue. And the problem with many conservative expressions of the world's religions is that they seek to reinforce traditional gender roles. They promote ideas of the godly woman as submissive and the godly man who exercises kingship in their households. They dismiss those whose gender expressions do not conform to these traditional understandings, and they label them as sinners who need to repent. Things were a bit different in Jesus' time, and yet somehow they were the same. Because in ancient farming societies, they were built on a value system of honor and shame. The most important thing in life was to maintain honor for yourself, for your family, and your larger kinship group. Your reputation, your status, your sexual identity were all areas where honor and shame were attached. So Jesus is already a cultural suspect. He has left his family home. He is unmarried. He is traveling around Jewish Judea and Gentile Palestine with this motley band of misfits. He has a more flexible relationship with women and with children, and he welcomes all into his family. This is a direct threat to the way society was structured in first century Palestine. And in today's text, he's in Gentile territory, and he is confronted by a man who is filled with demons. And they call themselves legion or battalion, presumably after the Roman soldiers who were occupying this land. And who knows what horrors he has suffered at the hands of these soldiers, and so he is undone. He is incapable of conforming to the expectations of his culture, and he is said to be possessed. This man has brought shame on his family. He has been ostracized, and he lives amongst the tombs, meaning that he is permanently unclean and outcast. And Jesus steps off his boat and is immediately confronted with this man, a real sight, naked and running around. And Jesus commands these demons to leave him. He has compassion on this man, and he seeks to heal him. And the text says that these demons recognize Jesus as the Son of the Most High God, and they beg him not to send them to destruction, but to let them enter unclean pigs. And the man is healed, and the pigs run off a cliff, and suddenly the social structure has been split open. Because when the people see that this man is now clothed and sitting at the feet of Jesus as if he were one of his own students, they are afraid. Jesus has upset their understanding of who is honored and who is shamed. This man is supposed to stay in the graveyards. They are terrified of a world where shame can be reversed, where honor can be restored. And so even though Jesus has done this great miracle of healing, they ask him to leave. And though the man begs to come along, Jesus sends him back as a witness to healing and wholeness in a world that is frightened of all that is different. This story was part of the lectionary readings for this week, but it seems so appropriate in light of the mass shooting in the gay nightclub in Orlando last Sunday. This story is laced with expectations and pressures to conform, and I think the same could be said of that shooter. What we now know is that he may have been struggling with his sexuality. He certainly reacted strongly to same-gender expressions of affection, even while he was frequenting gay dating sites and spending time at that club. He's been accused of domestic violence by both women he married. He was aggressive and inappropriate at work, saying anti-gay and anti-women things and spreading hatred. It seems as if he was confronting some very powerful demons in his psyche and his understanding of what it meant to be a man. If the research of that study I referenced earlier are right, when faced with gender role conflict, aggression is one way to ensure that everyone knows that you are courageous and masculine and not gay or feminine. And of course, there's no excuse for this horrific crime, and there are so many intersecting reasons for the shooter's actions. But the reality is that his demons got the best of him. And he entered a kind of sanctuary for the queer community, and he acted out his hatred of those he saw as different and threatening to his masculinity or his religion that reinforced those notions. And by killing 49 people and injuring 50 more, somehow he was trying to fix all that. How I wish he had been released of those demons that drove him to his insanity. How I wish he could have understood there is no shame in being gay, that you do not have to dominate women to prove you're a man, that killing and shooting does not make you courageous or strong. How I wish he had met Jesus on the road to Pulse that night, that his world would have been cracked open with possibility where love and kindness and compassion could have released him to a new way of being in the world. That is our call, to be Jesus to this world. This is the gift we have to share. Because Jesus lived in a world where you had to prove yourself over and over again, and he said, enough. Your status is not determined by conforming to the gender roles that have been dictated for you. Let the children come to me, he said, and he called women his disciples, and he ate with prostitutes and people who were ostracized, and he healed people and restored them to their communities. He conquered shame based on social expectations, and he restored honor to those who had been ostracized. And we are called to do the same. In many ways, we have moved beyond a world where one's manhood has to be proved, and thank God for that. And I was beginning to believe that we were a society that didn't care about gender identity or orientation. I was beginning to believe that we are open to all kinds of expressions of humanity. But for me, Orlando was a wake-up call. I have read hateful comments on the internet about how it was a good thing that gay people were targeted. There have been radical Christian ministers who have welcomed this violence against the LGBTQ community as some kind of punishment from God. I read that one of the victims, who had sung faithfully in his church choir for many years, was refused a funeral there because he was gay. Many have moved the commentary to ISIS and jihadi terrorism and tried to frame it as a gun control or a mental health issue. But the death of 49 souls who were targeted because they were gay cannot be ignored. And our brothers and sisters in the queer community deserve to be honored by us and remembered and mourned. We, as a progressive Christian community that welcomes diversity and affirms the dignity of all, need to stand up to this religious bigotry and proclaim that all are children of God, beloved children of God. I've read more than one commentary this week from gay people who are done with accepting that their lives can be judged in the name of religion. One was titled, "I'm Done Accommodating Religious Hatred Toward Queer Lives." And he says this: "How utterly pathetic that it took 49 lives slaughtered for me to pack up my thank you for your point of view on why queer lives are not fully human table and close shop. For too long, I have tolerated setting a big tent and allowing many points of view and dialogue when talking about LGBT people as if our lives are up for debate and as if the jury is still out on our humanity, our dignity, or our being made beautifully in God's image. There is no more debate on queer lives. I will love and be loved, and my love is not a question mark in your canon. I will not debate at your annual gathering. There is either death or life. I will choose life. I will give life everlasting." When Elijah stood on the mountain of God, he was looking for signs of strength in the wind and the earthquake and the fire, but God was not in these things. God was in the silence, in the still, small voice. And God said, "What are you doing here?" God was saying to Elijah, "Why are you avoiding your call?" In the wake of the Orlando shootings, I wonder if we are being asked the same question. What are you doing here, McDougall United? Do you really believe the gospel of Jesus Christ that stands with broken, rejected, and marginalized? Do you recognize the way that religion is constraining and shaming all kinds of people who don't quite fit? Do you honor the choices of men and women to live their lives authentically without conforming to gender roles? Do we stand with the marginalized and release them from these demons? Or do we fear the change that restores the possessed man to our community? And so I say to the men who sit here today, fathers and grandfathers, single men with no children, uncles, brothers, and sons, I am so grateful for your strength and your tenderness, your reliability and your playfulness. I have benefited from your role as provider and protector. Thank you for taking these things seriously and sacrificing to ensure that future generations prosper. But I am frustrated at a culture that asks you to prove that you are a man by acts of risk and aggression. But Jesus is our example of how to live. As you walk in his steps, you are free to be the man that God has made you. You've got nothing to prove. Use your strength to protect and provide for your families first, of course, but also for all those who are marginalized in a culture where they don't quite fit. It is not in the wind or the earthquake or the fire that God is found. It is in the still, small voice. Our gospel faith believes that God is calling us to better things. Our faith has transformed the world, and our faith will continue to make space for all God's children. Amen. I ask you to stand with me as we